In this video, we are going to learn about mesh display settings in Maya. In my example here, I have two meshes. One of them is a very organic shape and the other one is a more hard surface shape. So we'll see how these mesh display settings apply to both of these objects and how we can fine-tune them to ensure that our object has good display settings when taken into software like Substance Painter or into Unreal Engine. The first thing to note is that your smooth preview setting in Maya. So for example, if I take this mesh and I smooth it out by pressing 3 on my keyboard, this smooth preview setting does not translate over to other software. So if I were to take this into Substance or Unreal, it would go back to looking like this. And another thing to take note is that if you actually smooth your mesh by going up to Mesh and Smooth, you are adding a lot of extra edges and faces like you see here, and these are usually not necessary and often will bog down game engines and even Substance Painter sometimes. So let's take a look at how we can change how we view these same edges and faces so that we can keep the same resolution of our mesh while also viewing organic shapes. You can find the mesh display settings under mesh display and make sure that you are in the modeling menu on the left over here, because if you're in another menu you might not have that option. So in the modeling menu you can find the settings in mesh display. The first settings that I'm going to go over are these three: the harden edge, the soften edge, and the soften and harden edges. So in these three meshes here that are of a more organic shape, this mesh has the harden edges applied to it. So I went to mesh display and harden edge, and that is what you see here. So even though this is an organic shape, you're able to see every single polygon that I have on this object. And this mesh right here has the soften harden edges setting applied to it. And you'll see that this setting right here has options, and you can change the angle at which it smooths out the faces. So here this is the default of 30. That's what this has applied to it. So if I just apply it again, it doesn't change anything, but you can also change this to a lower number. So let's say I change this to 18, for example, and I apply, let me select that and I apply that again. It's going to give you harder edges. And if I change this to a higher number like 60, it is going to give you softer edges. So with the same setting, the soft and harden edges, you can really control how soft or how hard you want your edges to be. I'm going to reset these settings and just apply the 30. This is what I want to view right now. And let's go to the last option, and that is the soften edge. So this one was created by just going to mesh display and soften edge. And that just gives you a standard softness of your edges all the way throughout. You still see some shading artifacts, but once you have your textures on there and you have your high poly bake from ZBrush, these really won't be as visible as they are over here. And these settings, all of the settings that you apply in Maya, they will translate over to Substance. We'll see how that works in a bit, but these will translate over to Substance. They'll also translate over to Unreal Engine, where you will be rendering your objects. Now for organic shapes, sometimes what I do is I will use the soften harden edges from over here, and I will change these settings to get an angle that fits best. Sometimes all that you need to do is just hit the soften edge and you get something like this, which works pretty well. Now for hard surface shapes, this is where it gets a little more complicated, where you, especially when you have cylinders. So this is a cylinder, this is a cylindrical shape, and this just has mesh display, harden edge applied all throughout. This is not great because you see all these faceted edges that you probably don't want to see within your game engine. And then you have over here the exact opposite of that, which is the soften edge, which is also not great because you sort of lose this extrusion that you have here. It makes it a lot softer. This is not really very nice. And you get a lot of weird shading artifacts here that you really don't want to see on a hard surface object. This one is the soften harden edge setting. For hard surface objects, this usually works well at the default, so I selected these and went to soften harden edges and set it to 30. This works at the default, but in some cases you might want most of the edges to be soft, while just having a few edges have that hard surface shape. In this case, what I like to do is I like to select individual edges. Let's look at this object, for example. If I wanted to select individual edges on this, let's go to this shape, go to edge mode. I would select all of these edges that go all the way around and just go to mesh display and soften edge. And this would soften just these edges while leaving everything else at its more faceted state. It might be easier to see on this model where you have a variety of edges. So let me just select all these edges that go all the way around and go to mesh display and soften edge. And you can see how that softened just these edges and you still have hard edges in other places. Fine-tuning these edges in this manner might be necessary for hard surface objects, while on organic objects you can usually get a pretty good result with just soften edge. Now let's see how all of these settings translate over to Substance Painter and apply to the baking of the object. Okay, so we are within Substance Painter with these exact same meshes. All these objects have the same UVs, they are the exact same mesh, and the only thing that's different about them is the mesh display settings from Maya. So let's take a look at what we have here. Just to tell you what I've done so far, I have just baked these meshes on themselves with the default baking settings. I don't have a high poly mesh in here as of now. And I have also added a fill layer with the color red on it, and on that fill layer I have added the concrete edges mask that detects the edges of our objects based on the baked maps. You can see here that this mesh, which has really hard edges, the mask has detected every single edge while baking, while adding that generator on it. It's detected every single edge. When you have the soften harden edges setting, it has detected the edges that we wanted to, and a few more, like these over here, that we might not want it to detect. And within the soften edge setting, it has detected whichever edges we needed to. And this is an organic object that does have some hard surface elements, as you can see here, but in the case of this object, I think that this gives me a more desirable result. Now let's look at this one, the hard surface shape, and you can see that we get similar results. Often for hard surface shapes, just applying a soften harden edges with the default gives you the best result, as you can see here. So you're detecting all these edges, you are avoiding these edges over here that are being detected when you have harden edges turned on. And in the soften edge settings, you're getting really weird shading here, which is not ideal. This is what the mesh is going to look like in Unreal Engine as well. So you don't want a hard surface shape to have such soft edges. So when you are taking in your object, what settings you use really depend on the specific object you have, and you may need to go in and change these settings, fine-tune these settings to get the exact result that you want. I just thought I'd record a little more of an explanation as to how the soft and hardened edges works in regards to the angle. So when you're using this one, the soft and hard edges, and you set an angle over here, what you're essentially saying is that any angle that is below 30 degrees is going to be softened, and any angle above that is going to be a hard edge. And that's why that works so well for hard surface objects, because any objects like cylinders, let me turn this off. Any objects like cylinders are going to get those softer edges because they are usually below an angle of 30 degrees, and you will get harder edges for the parts that you need them. And the reason it causes issues the lower that this number is, so if I set this to 0, for example, or something like 2, like a really low number, it is not going to soften these edges out because these edges are around that angle. And that's what this angle setting means. If you know exactly what angle edges are from each other, this could be useful because you could select certain areas of the mesh, set the angle, and get the exact softness setting for each edge that you need.